Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Canon Unscripted. I'm your host, Mason Higa, and I appreciate you all tuning in. This is our show by Canon USA, and it's an opportunity for us to sit down with some of our favorite photographers, filmmakers, and creatives to talk about what makes them click and how they've pursued their passions, which evolved into their careers. And of course, since this is a Canon show, we talk about the Canon gear that they use to bring their vision to life. To find out more about all of the products, please go to usa.canon.com/unscripted and subscribe to our socials to keep up with the latest and greatest. On today's show, we have Canon Explorers of Light, Erin Babnik. Erin's work transcends the ordinary, capturing breathtaking landscapes that evoke emotion and wonder. We delve into Erin's creative process, discussing her techniques for capturing and conveying the essence of natural beauty through her lens. As an educator and speaker, Erin shares the stories behind her most iconic images and insights into the challenges and rewards of pursuing landscape photography. Whether you're a seasoned photographer or simply passionate about the beauty of nature, this episode promises to spark your creativity and deepen your appreciation for the art of landscape photography. I had an incredible time during our conversation and thankful for Erin coming on to the show. Without further ado, here's my unscripted talk with Erin Babnik.
There was that point, where I had to make a decision. Well, do I continue with what I'm doing? Because this is really pulling me. This photography is so much fun, and I'm now doing it outdoors on my own, and that's even more engaging. It was just a matter of time before I made the decision that, I think I'm going to have to go do this.
Erin, thanks for being on the show.
I'm super excited to be here.
I know. For those of you that haven't been, tuning in and watching the previous episodes, Erin is one of our premier Canon Explorers of Light. She's a fantastic landscape photographer. And I will say that I've had a lot of great memories with Erin because we've done a lot of workshops together as well, too. So this is a nice and pleasant welcome for Erin to be here with us.
Yep, those were all good times, lots of projects. And I'm thrilled to be back.
Yeah, we're here in Costa Mesa.
Costa Mesa.
That's it, and having a nice little sit down now, right? So, again, thanks for being on the show, and we're really just so delighted to have you here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So let's get into it, right? Because I don't know you that well. It's not like, but I know you pretty well.
You know me pretty well.
I know you pretty well, and again, for those of your fans that have been, that have been following your career, but also for the new people, we want to kind of like start all the way at the beginning in the sense of like your early career, you were an art historian.
Yes.
Right. And that helped to lead you to becoming a photographer. Do you want to talk about that?
It's an unusual route into doing what I'm doing. But when I was an art historian, I had to learn how to use a camera in order to develop an archive of photographs for teaching and research. Because you have to, if you're doing your own research, have your own photographs that illustrate essentially what it is that you're trying to work on or trying to teach. So a lot of those images were purely for teaching, and a lot of them were just for like starting out early my dissertation and that sort of thing. But it became a very slippery slope. It was super fun. And it was also kind of frustrating, though, because I would spend a lot of time out in archaeological parks in Europe and the Middle East, where they would have these rules about whether or not you could use a tripod or whether or not you could photograph when the light was kind to the environment, right? So often I was stuck in the middle of an archaeological park at 3 a.m. with the high sun and no tripod and didn't really appreciate the aesthetics of what I was doing. And so it's kind of funny, but it had never occurred to me early on, because that was before the days of social media, but it had never occurred to me that since I really enjoyed using the camera, that it might be fun to take the camera up into the mountains, because I used to love hiking and backpacking and all of that. And nowadays that seems like the obvious thing to do with the camera, but back then it wasn't. It was like, that could actually be fun. I could take my camera and I have none of these restrictions, Sometimes I would get extra allowances of time, and I could get permission to come in when the park was even closed or something like that. But still, it wasn't the same as going out into nature with my camera, being able to do whatever I wanted to. And once I did that, that was it. You know, it was just sort of a slow gravitation towards becoming a landscape photographer.
So you were hooked, right?
I was absolutely hooked. Yeah. And when I was still doing the academic photography, I had become good enough at it that people were hiring me to do assignment work. So I was being sent. I was doing a lot of travel. I was being sent out to all sorts of interesting places to do that. And I already had about a third of my income coming in from that while it was still, so I was like moonlighting, you know, as an assignment photographer. And so there was that point, you know, where I had to make a decision. Well, do I continue with what I'm doing? Because this is really pulling me. This photography is so much fun. And I'm now doing it outdoors on my own. And that's even more engaging. And I had this kind of bridge, right? So that I had this kind of means of supporting myself at a very low level starting out.
Still,
but yeah,
right?
It was something.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of time before I made the decision that, I think I'm going to have to go do this. And the hardest thing about that decision for me was realizing that I wasn't really giving up anything by leaving academe. You know, that was, I think, what held me back. It was really about 5 years a 5-year period when I was going through this kind of turmoil, inner turmoil. And it was when I finally realized that I wasn't actually giving up teaching. I wasn't giving up going to exotic places. I wasn't giving up, you know, all the interesting engagement that I had with very interesting people around the world. I was still lecturing. I was still writing. I was still, you know, doing all these things as I started to get more professionally engaged in photography. And it wasn't until I finally realized that I am still doing all of the stuff that I did as an academic, you know, just in a different context.
So there was still that sense of fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that personal
so
fulfillment.
I didn't feel like I was just like dumping
Yeah.
so much education and so much time to do something else entirely. And instead I realized, no, I'm just building on it.
And 5 years is not like, that's an investment, right? You know, I mean, like time to really know your craft and everything and get to know, and also too, but just that, like that aha moment, right? So to be like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, actually it started even sooner than that, 5 years. It was there was like this 5-year period when I realized what I wanted to do, but I just couldn't convince myself that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, in that period though, I was able to basically cut my teeth and really hone my skills and kind of dial in on what I wanted to do. And then when it came, the real tipping point for me was when I got to the point now I was doing so much landscape and now social media was starting to become a thing very slowly, early days. But I eventually had people asking me for things, professional things that I wasn't, services and whatnot, that I wasn't offering. You know, they wanted private workshops. They wanted me to teach them how I process and that sort of thing. And that was when I realized, all right, the iron is hot, you know, now is the time. You know, you strike or, you know, you just say, okay, you're not doing it, because I was being pulled in two different directions. And when that started coming in more and more, that was what finally emboldened me to say, okay, this 5-year period needs to stop now.
Sure. And we'll get to the workshops too, because for those of you, again, tuning in, if you've never been on a workshop with Erin, it is one of the best experiences that you'll have. That's why it's like, I always had a ton of fun with you and learned so much. So, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
Where were you living at the time? Like, you know, being an art historian, and how did that really influence like so much of that opportunity that you had?
Well, for a very long time, I've had a split existence. So I was living early on then, partly in Berkeley, because I was at UC Berkeley, that's where I did BA, MA, PhD. Although didn't finish the PhD, I bailed on that. I was ABD when I finally decided to leave. But when I wasn't in residence, I had grants or what have you to work on my dissertation. I was in my other home in Slovenia, in Europe. And that gave me access to having two home bases like that to a lot of terrain, right? So
yeah. And that's kind of, it's a significant advantage for yourself too, right?
yeah.
Yeah, because not a lot of people can say, I live on one side of the world and I get to travel to the other side of the world, and having so many resources as well too, which is, again, that's a huge benefit for you to have that.
And that's how my love affair with the Dolomites started, because Slovenia is so close. And back then, like I said, this was before the days of social media. I didn't know what was over there. I just knew that there were some mountains, and the photographs that I had seen tended to be mostly what was common back then was to photograph the cute little villages down in the valleys. And I remember looking at it and thinking, this thing that I like to do with my camera, running around in the mountains with it now, that would be fun if I got out of the villages and up into the mountains. Maybe I could do that there. Again, something that seems completely obvious nowadays. But,
right?
Yeah, to me, I was just like, let's go see what that's all about. Let's see if that might work.
Because it's a hike. It's a hike to get there.
Oh,
right?
Lots of hiking in the Dolomites, right? And I love doing that.
Right.
So I was exploring and going to places for photography where I would never, to this day, some of them, I never see other photographers. So back then, photographers were mostly in the valleys using long lenses or shooting the little temples or not temples, little churches and whatnot. Or they would be climbers, like the Cortina squirrels who'd, bring a little camera up with them. And they were basically documenting what they were doing while they were climbing. But there wasn't a strong impulse, especially with Europe's sort of background and other genres of photography. Landscape photography really has its roots in very much so in the United States, in the American West especially. And it was coming up a little bit in sort of in England, that was sort of a center for it, and then also in, I think, Australia early on. But at that time in Italy, that wasn't really the go-to genre for most photographers. There were some doing it, but yeah, so I really just had to figure it out as I went along. And that was immensely formative for me to just have to do that, to get a bunch of topographical maps, figure out the sorts of features that I might find at certain elevations, and what I like to do and where I wanted to go and how was I going to put all this together. And I think that just having access to all of that, and because I was just working on my dissertation, I was completely free to structure my time however I wanted, and having the freedom to kind of explore really did a lot for me.
Yeah. How long do you think it took you to be like that transition again, the growing process or the growing pains from starting off and be like, I'm going to go explore the mountains with the camera, to then like feeling good about your images?
That's a tough question to answer, especially for someone who sort of leans more fine art than commercial, because I think that the common thing with all kind of our creative people is that you never feel like you've reached that point, right? And that's a good thing because it keeps you motivated. Right. The day that you kind of sit back rest on your laurels and you think, I got this, that's the day you just plateau.
Yeah.
Right. So you always need that feeling that, no, I'm not good enough. I guess what really gave me the courage, like I said, was when you're getting this response and there's a buzz, and people want things that you're not even offering. I guess I'm doing something right.
Sure. Because I remember seeing your work on a social site long ago, and I was just like, I remember I saw a few people and a few things, images, and I would always check, every day going on all these websites. And then I saw your work and I was like, who is this? And then also too, your photo with the
I had the gator and I was just covered in frost.
Covered in frost. I was like, who is this person? And I was like, your images always just look so fantastic. So yeah, absolutely. And this was like years ago as well too.
A long time ago.
But
yeah, the frost. That's part of another thing that my academic background did for me, because as I was a specialist in classical art, so the art specifically of ancient Greece and Rome, and that means you're a de facto archaeologist. And I had to actually learn dirt archaeology, and I spent a lot of time in Israel excavating there. So I learned how to swing a pickaxe. I learned how to get up at 3 a.m. and get really dirty. And I became very accustomed to just doing really kind of grueling things outdoors. And so if it means getting blasted by, cold air and, encrusted in frost, as a landscape photographer, it was all kind of normal by then. This is one of those things you endure.
Yeah. You're like, no problem, right?
But I think it was archaeology that toughened me up to the point where I felt that way about it. I'm just happy to be outdoors.
No, absolutely. I mean, because again, like on our workshops that we've done, we're up way before sunrise and staying out till way past sunset, and even way past. Just depends on how long of a drive it is, right? So you have to have that endurance level.
Yeah, you really do.
Right?
Yeah.
And then also too, just trying to keep up with you is a tough task. Because I remember one time we were at a workshop and you're leading the pack. You're just like way out there carrying how many pounds in your pack? Maybe at least 40?
It's up there. It
right?
depends. If I'm doing a workshop where we're backpacking out to a hut in the mountains or something, maybe up that high, but it's mostly probably around 20-25, but it's substantial.
Yeah, it's heavyweight, you know, and so it's like, you would just be leading the pack and then you'd be running back, and I'm like, how does she do this, So it's incredible, like the amount of fortitude and fitness that you have to have.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And just being willing to put up with things like, gale force winds and sub-zero temperatures or way too much heat. And
Another day at the office.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think I would have been able to put up with it had I not been through those archaeological experiences, because it was really sort of baptism by fire. And that was hard work, really hard work. Excavating sometimes almost under the threat of war too. There were some. I wasn't there during actual shells flying over, but some of my team was the following year. But it's just the sort of thing that kind of, once you've been through that, landscape photography is easy.
You just go with the seasons, right? Yeah. Nature seasons, that is. Yeah, absolutely. Are you still associated with any of the previous work and everything like that?
I'm sorry to say that my mentor passed away last year, and the others have all retired. So I'm dating myself now, but some of them for sure. Some of my classmates from graduate school, absolutely. Yeah, I keep in touch with them, but it's mostly just on a friendly level.
Back to the Dolomites, you really. And again, like looking at locations and things like that, the Dolomites, I never saw images of the Dolomites the way that I saw images of the way that you really put the Dolomites on the map, I would say, as a photographic location.
Or at least for the type of photography that I was doing. Yeah. Like I said, photographers flocked there for the villages early on. And and I have to say, I love Italians, I love the culture, I love the people, and I've had so many young Italian photographers see me out there, and come up, and their attitude is so charming. They'll come up. I've had many of them say, "Thank you for the work that you've done here." Americans, I don't think quite have that attitude on the whole. When someone has done a lot of kind of early work in an area. But the Italians, they really appreciated that someone took an interest in these sort of lesser known parts of their mountains. I just love that they're just so encouraging and welcoming rather than feeling like I'm invading their territory.
Sure. That's always a plus, right? Yeah, absolutely. And then, so this transition again from being a archaeologist, do you feel like that was more process driven, and then to go to being now this full-time photographer? That's a
great question.
Yeah.
And the answer is really the connection was coming from the process end of things through a period where I had to produce images that didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And so that wasn't just taking the scientific images that were so common back in those days, where you had the front, the side, the back of a sculpture, the top, you had to see the whirl on the hair, the back, right? And it all had to be lit in such a way that it was sort of scientifically documentary, right? And instead, what I would be doing was, for example, let's say I wanted to photograph the portrait of Alexander the Great. There are a number of them in some European museums. And I wanted to photograph it as someone from that period would see it, because in antiquity, those statues, firstly, wouldn't be just a head replicated by the Romans. It would have been a full-scale statue standing on some kind of podium or base that's quite tall. So you'd be looking up at it, and it would be outdoors. And that's a totally different kind of lighting and a totally different address to the sculpture than that scientific approach, right? And it's interesting that when you photograph these sculptures from the vantage point from which they're intended to be viewed, they change quite a bit. And you can see what decisions the sculptor was trying to make. Alexander the Great, for example, he looks like kind of a shy boy when viewed in that scientific fashion. But viewed at the angle at which he would have been viewed, he looks like a lion. And in the ancient sources, they actually describe him that way. It's very leonine. And finding that angle, it's like, of course, that's the privileged angle from which the sculptor would expect it to be seen. So that's a creative approach, right? How do I make this sculpture communicate what it is that I want to express about the context of it? So that was kind of the linkage to thinking outside the box.
Yeah. What does it mean to have that amplitude? Did it oh, I should photograph it this way, or I should look at it this way based on the intent of the original artist, right? And again, instead of being just this scientific kind of thing, why did you want to do that?
I owe that a lot to my mentor, Andy Stewart.
Yeah.
May he rest in peace. But awesome guy who encouraged his students to think outside the box and to think very much in the context of the artwork itself. And we are storytellers as art historians. That's one thing that you learn, is that history is a story, right? And so he very much instilled that in me. That's where I got it from, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, I always tie it back to just working with you and being in the field. We could be somewhere with beautiful scenery, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, take a look at this. And it's something that nobody would have seen, And so that's why I can say from firsthand experience working with you that how do you see that stuff?
Well,
right.
So specifically, you cannot unlearn or unsee things the way that you're taught to see things as an art historian, right? Mm-hmm. Everything is interpretive as an art historian, right? That's essentially what you're doing. You're telling the stories, you're interpreting these things. And so to me, when I'm out in the field, every mountain, every tree is an expressive abstract sculpture in a landscape, or to me, more specifically, a character in a context. And that is my way into photographing. I look out at a landscape and I see features that are in dialogue with each other. And I'm making up interpretations for myself, right? So I see the stories out there. That comes 100% out of my background as an art historian. And it totally guides me in the field, so that I'm not just thinking scientifically, or it's not all our leading lines, and I'm not just looking at it from a structural perspective or formalist perspective. Instead, I'm telling stories, and that makes it more fun and a lot more productive. So I can find things and see things that I probably wouldn't otherwise. If I were just sort of, you've probably heard the old what was it? It was like a study on what people notice and don't notice based on what they've been primed to look for. Mm-hmm. The gorilla suit. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but a lot of people talk about the study that was done where people were asked to focus on a bunch of women throwing balls around, and you had to count how many times the women passed the balls. And meanwhile, this guy in a gorilla suit literally walks right across the stage, and most people, about half the people, won't even see it because they're so focused on. And so I think that's true. I'm not the first person to bring that up. A lot of people mention that study. But It is true that if you're focusing on things that you've been taught that are fundamental and formalist, it tends to be that that's all you will see. You know, I want to go out and I want to find a big in your face foreground with lots of leading lines and, you know, a big mountain in the background. You know, that's all you're going to find. And if it's not there, guess what you're going to find? Nothing. Yeah. Right. So, yeah. So rather than that, if you just go out and have a kind of playful attitude and look at what you do see and what does it make you think of? And if it could talk, what would it be saying? And is it in dialogue with anything else around it? And how can I frame this image such that maybe my viewer might, on some subliminal level, see that too? That's always my way in. Way more fun.
Way fun. And it's funny that you say play, because I was going to ask the follow-up. What kind of opportunities do you, again, being a speaker, educator, photographer, what kind of opportunities do you have to play and experiment with your photography?
Well, mostly the play for me happens when I have some time to myself, to be honest. Yeah, so I do spend a lot of time helping others, and I do a lot of teaching. And when I am out teaching, in general, I tend to I let my own interests go, right? So I defer to everyone there. I let them have pride of place, and I'm just trying to help them. And in the period preceding recent years, I was doing so many workshops that I wasn't actually getting enough time for myself. And so the last year or so, I've decided to kind of scale back a little bit and do more of my own personal projects. But it does take some time. In order to play, you can't have other responsibilities weighing on you too much. You know, you can fit it in a little bit, but sometimes we're all playing together. You know, and there are times when, you know, you got to keep it light, you got to keep it playful, and they can happen side by side. But yeah, I think when a person is on a workshop, that's a perfect opportunity to play, right? Because you have no other responsibilities. Everything is taken care of for you. So it's kind of just the opposite when you're running the workshop. Everybody's safety, there's so much that you're responsible for. You know? Right. It's a different thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. From transportation to eating,
get
first
them fed,
aid.
Make sure they're comfortable. Where are we going tonight? How much sleep are they going to get? You know, yeah.
And then how much time do you have for yourself to keep learning as well, too?
Oh, that's constant.
Yeah.
And again, you know, that's one thing that you just have to force in there. You can't say, I don't have time for it. Sometimes you just have to say, all right, I'm not doing so many workshops this month. I'm going to read some books. And what I like to do, I read pretty widely on all sorts of creative topics that aren't necessarily photography. To get me back into the art history, just remind me where I came from, back to the roots kind of stuff. Super inspiring, but also going to museums.
Yeah.
I was just at a museum yesterday. I went to the Seattle Art Museum, and there's really, for me, there's probably nothing better than going to a museum. It is so inspiring and educational.
What kind of books would you recommend, if there's anything lately?
I really do like art history books. I like books that are kind of peripheral. So books that talk about landscape in a kind of theoretical way. There's quite a genre on this, actually, that are really interesting. They're not about necessarily photography or even the representation of landscape, but there's a whole scholarly genre right now about what is landscape, what does it mean to people, how are our personal mythologies kind of embedded in them. Without getting too scholarly here, I think it's fascinating, and it really... It gets me thinking, and if nothing else, it kind of informs the way that I write, you know, things that I have to say in my talks, and all of it kind of feeds together into what I'm doing out in the field. You know, you have enough of this stuff kicking around in the back of your mind. You're not actually thinking about it in the field, but it's certainly there working for you behind the scenes. You know? Yeah.
Again, follow-up question. So easy with you, Erin. You're giving me these easy segues, right? So you have this wealth of knowledge and experience. Like, how do you tap into it?
You mean like in the field?
Yeah, in the field as well. Yeah.
You know, I think this is probably true for anyone who's been doing anything for a certain amount of time. It just becomes habit. That's essentially what style is. If you've ever read the book Art and Fear, they make a wonderful point of this, that all style is habit. And it's something, just means you've been doing it a long time, right? And I think that if you just keep at it and you keep doing these things, you keep reading, you keep, I don't know, informing yourself and educating yourself, eventually you don't really have to think about it. It's something that just comes out of you. But if I'm in the field and it's one of those days where nothing really seems to be working for me, I do think about it. At least I have that to go to. I can sort of think about things and get a little analytical about it. Yeah. And I have something to work with there. I have those chops, right? I can get analytical. Yeah. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes, yeah. So what do you do then if it's just not working out for you? Do you just kind of
I just mess around and experiment. One of my new kind of favorite smaller scenes that I've shot was one day I brought a portrait lens out with me into the field, the 85 millimeter RF 85 millimeter f1.2L USM, and that's not a landscape lens by anyone's definition, right? But I had it in the bag, just thinking, well, if all else fails, I'll play with that lens just to see what I can do. All else failed. The weather was super overcast, very flat light. There wasn't really a lot on offer that I thought I was going to do in that location. And I had a bunch of Joshua trees around me. And so I took out that portrait lens and I just kind of shot it down the throat of the thing wide open. And it created something I never would have thought to do. Yeah. I did not have that idea going in there. It was just like, I don't know, what would this look like? So just playing, just experimenting.
Well, there's a good opportunity then for us to kind of segue into the Canon gear, right?
Okay, let's do that.
I mean, again, I always preface this, hey, this is a Canon podcast, so of course, or a Canon interview, and of course, we're going to talk about Canon gear. I mean, right? So what's your go-to? Like, if we opened up your camera bag, what would we find in there?
It changes a lot, and it really does depend on where I'm at and what I think might be on offer to me there. But my go-to, if I'm hiking really far and I want to keep it light and I really have to make hard decisions, I'll usually just take two lenses because I want to keep it simple and light, and I've got to carry this stuff on my back, right? So it'll probably be some kind of ultra wide and some kind of super tele. So I'm missing out that middle part where most people would say that's where your focal length should be for landscape photography. And that's because I enjoy trying to see things not how the human eye normally sees things. I want to be able to experiment with those extremes. And that's where I just tend to have the most fun. So I actually have a portfolio that is largely made up of, those kinds of extremes, and the normal range isn't in there so much. But if I can bring a third lens, it's definitely going to be the RF 24 to 105 millimeter f4L ISUSM. That is an awesome lens. If I have only one lens to bring.
Oh, wait, what's the two lenses though?
I didn't say the 100 to RF 100 to 500. That lens, more often than not, is in the bag. Now, if I don't feel as though there's going to be a good terrain for it, there are certain things that, there's certain places where I feel like I might not find a good use for that lens. And it's a big lens. And if I'm hiking far, maybe I won't bring that one in. Instead, I'll just bring the RF 24 to 105 millimeter, and then the f4. And one of my ultra wides. I usually like to have one of those in the bag. And that changes a lot. So recently I did a YouTube video for Canon that's on the Canon USA website about the RF 14 to 35 millimeter f4L ISUSM. Ridiculously awesome lens. Yeah. I love that one for so many reasons that I detailed in that video. Great range. That is really an amazing range. There's so much you can do in that range, but also it takes regular screw-on filters. It has 77 millimeter filter threads. So one set of filters can rule them all for my whole bag. If I have the three lenses that I mentioned so far, they all take 77.
And that's important for a lot of people.
It helps.
Especially for landscape, yeah.
But recently I've been toting around the RF 10 to 20
10 to 20. Hey, there it is right there.
Yeah,
that's it right there. 10 to 20.
Bad boy is so much fun.
So much fun.
Because it was
right?
me in the EF 11 to 24 millimeter for years, right?
Right.
That was my buddy.
Yeah.
But it's an EF lens for one thing, and now I'm using the R5s, two R5s. But 10 millimeters. Good
It's
times.
cool,
It
right?
is so much fun.
It's so
yes,
cool.
and it's just a very well behaved lens and excellent image quality. I recently went on a big trip through the Southwest photographing. I was in search of color, and so a lot of wildflowers and that sort of thing. And let me tell you, getting up close and personal with a bunch of crazy peaking wildflowers and that lens, I basically had to tear myself away. It was endlessly entertaining.
Yeah. Are you using, what kind of filters are you using on? Are you at all?
That one I haven't even attempted it yet.
Okay.
So I will have to look and see if there are any options out there for adding a polarizing filter to it. There were for the 11 to 20 EF 11 to 24 millimeter. But they attach to the front of the lens, and since that was a big lens, we're talking like satellite dish levels of filtration.
I remember seeing a photo. I was like, "Oh my god, this is as big as a plate."
Yeah. But we'll see. So lately though, because they're so small and light now, right, I can pack them both, the 14 and the 10, no problem.
Right.
I also have the 15 to, RF 13 to 35 millimeter.
15 to 35.
Which is also super fun lens. I had that one before the others came out.
Yeah.
But anymore, I can bring them both. They're so small, like the size of a little Coke bottle, and they're so light. Unless if I'm hiking really far, like I said earlier, okay, I have to make some hard decisions.
Yeah. I know those are pretty cool lenses, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And then, and you said you're using two EOS R5s,
Yes,
right?
yes. I have a pair of those. Yeah.
Yeah. How does focal length impact composition for you?
Focal length for me, I touched on it a little bit, is one of those topics that I think gets short shrift in landscape photography. People just have it in their heads. It's, I think, breaking up a little bit, but they've have it in their heads. There are certain focal lengths for landscape photography, and those are your go-to. You do that and get some side light, and you're good to go. Done.
It's a good recipe. Works most of the time.
But for me, as I said earlier, it's really a matter of storytelling when you're out there. And it's amazing how you can replicate sort of the structural effects of one focal length in another, given the right terrain. I have a couple of images that I show in a talk that I do on focal lengths where I have one taken at 400 millimeters and another at ultra wide, and they have a very similar kind of immersive feel to them. So I think it's a bit misleading to always say that, your wide angle focal lengths are your immersive ones, and your telephoto focal lengths are your ones that are good for compression and layering. So that is sort of standard received wisdom, right? That works until it doesn't, right? There are some times when you just happen to have features in a landscape where even at 400 millimeters, you still have this great sense of immersion if you compose it that way, just because that's what the features of the land are giving you. So for me, focal lengths are really about seeing in a certain way more so than the effects that they give you. So that's kind of secondary to me. So like I said, seeing in a way that I don't normally see. There's a lot of literature on what exactly is the focal length of the human eye, for example, and nobody really agrees exactly on that. But
35, 40, 50,
right?
right?
Yeah. So there's technically it's 17, but there's your peripheral vision, and then like the 35 to 50, that's supposed to be what you're actually focusing on, but you can't actually see this stuff. But it really all kind of breaks down because your eyes aren't cameras, and your brain is part of the equation too. As you look around, your brain's putting it all together. So really what I want to do is enable people to see something that I see that isn't just a replication of what's out there. It isn't just a replication of how you would see it if you walked up and that would be the first obvious thing to strike you. I mean, some images do kind of look that way, but others do not. What really pins them all down for me is that, the thread that runs through it all for me is that there's a little story going on in there, and that it's in some regards either emotionally compelling or, compelling on some level that doesn't have to be, these standard ideas of being able to have a descriptive, relatable, side-lit, view of something as you would expect it to see if you walked out of the car and stepped up to that point, Yeah.
How much of that is also in composition, post-processing as well?
Yeah.
Right? Because I know you're excellent at Photoshop as well too, right? And processing your images. How does, and as well as, of course, color.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
so
I love
all
color.
of that front end stuff is important, but also too like that back end stuff or the secondary nature of photography.
For sure. Well, with regards to post-processing,
Mm-hmm.
I think in the field with that in mind.
Yeah.
So
To the edit.
I'm shooting for the edit. Yeah. So very often I'm not, one of my least favorite terms is get it right in camera, because, the camera is just a magical, awesome, wonderful tool, right? But it's not my product, right? What I'm going to produce relies on me just being able to get that data into that camera so that I can work with it. So very often, if I, for example, a focus stack would be a perfect example, right? That's not going to happen in camera. Someday it probably will, but that sort of misses the point. To me, it's like I'm just gathering what I need to create what I want. It's like it's just I don't understand this sort of pedantic idea that it needs to be done, while it's still in the little black box. It's like, the camera works for me, basically. Not the other way around.
Right. No, sure. Yeah. It's just pulling all the assets for you, right?
Yep, that's it. So when I'm out in the field, I'm thinking, what all do I need here to produce what I want to produce? But also, once you do sit down to do an edit, that I think is another big part of where the magic happens, especially in landscape photography, because nature is very, very forgiving. You can look at a nature photo and there's a lot that you can do to it, and it still looks like a very compelling nature photo. Unlike maybe what you can do to a person, where skin color, if it's off, it looks like, are they okay? Like it's not quite as forgiving.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot that you can do to be expressive on the post-processing end of things. And I really enjoy playing with that, sometimes to a fault, I often, but you got to push it too far before you know when to pull it back. But I just think it's super fun to be able to make the story come out a little bit more with the post-processing. And if that means like sort of subduing certain areas and bringing out others and making sure, it's not just about, getting dust bunnies out and making sure there's like the correct exposure. Not at all. To me, it's about helping the mood, helping that story come out, and working with the colors such that I can subdue areas using colors. Cooler colors tend to recede, warmer colors come forward. So there's a lot you can do. And like I said, you can get away with it because it still looks like nature.
Yeah, sure. Right? A little flower here, a little flower there. but yeah, I remember still to this day, the photo of, in Death Valley, of the dunes with the wildflowers at the front.
Yeah.
Right? And you have the pyramid shape in the background with the one dude, and then the inverse pyramid with the flowers. And to see the before, I was lucky to see the before as well as the after image. I was like, wow, like you really transformed that image into something so incredible.
Yeah, that image is kind of my poster child for what I have to say about color theory. So in that image, what I was doing was sort of sampling some of the colors from the flowers and imbuing the sky with that so that it would harmonize more, and really playing up the light coming into the scene, I did a lot of sort of cloning out distractions where a bird had kind of landed on some of the sand and disturbed it, and sort of worked that out of there. But it's all kind of little subtle little things where, if you look at the before and after, you're like, yeah, it's the same photo, but yeah, in mood and just in the way that it sort of hums, very, very different.
Very different. Yeah, the expression of it, it's just like, I was like, wow. I wish I could do that. But there is only one Erin. So I was just that's why, again, like, it's in my brain. Like, there is no way I'm forgetting that image. And that's why it's like, wow, that's an incredible image. So
Thank you.
Do you have a video on that one about processing it, or did you write
I do not. I should. Huh? I have done it as in workshops.
Yeah, and workshops we've seen that.
Yeah.
But I think you wrote about it in an article, maybe.
That's very possible.
Yeah.
I've definitely written about it in terms of color theory.
Yeah. Because, I was like, wow, this is great.
Thank you.
So what's it like running your business, too, right? Because that's I'm trying to just cover as much gamut here as possible.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Running the business is not what I signed up for, you know, when I got into landscape photography, but it's it's just necessary. It's helpful to have help. I'll say that, having assistance helps a bit, but it's one of those genres where there's really only so much that you can delegate. As I've found, I've actually struggled with delegation, or maybe I'm just bad at it. But yeah, that takes up an enormous amount of time, just doing the business end of things, especially if you're running your own workshops.
Yeah.
All right. So that's mostly where I use my assistants. That's where I found I can actually delegate that stuff. It's like, here's my itinerary, go make it happen. Call all those hotels and those huts and the transportation services and the get my permits for me. It's a whole lot of stuff.
It's a lot of process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I've never been able to figure out is the email. So, that is one thing that I think most photographers complain about, is just the absolute, and it's not just email these days, it's every social media app, having to respond to people who are coming at you from every different angle. Someone's probably really good at that. That someone is not me. But yeah, I always feel like I'm drowning in all of that. But yeah,
I mean, it's a lot to intake. You probably have like tons of DMs and
that's
messages.
The thing.
Yeah, it's hard to.
And that's people increasingly. That's how they want to do business too. They'll reach out to you, on a social media service rather than emailing, and I'll see that, but where was that? It's not like email where back in the day when it's all, you just flag stuff and it's all in one place. It's scattered across. So I just have to get in the habit of saying, can you just email me? Because I'll never remember where we were talking. Yeah. I'll go back to that.
The searchability of it all, right? Yeah, follow-ups. No, for sure. I mean, we've DM'd people as well, and it's just like, hey, guys, and it's just like, it's hard to like get a hold of people sometimes.
Yeah.
But back to your workshops. Are you planning on continuing to do workshops more?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I said, I decided to do a sort of hiatus for a while so I could focus on some other projects and some things that I need to do for me, because it's like the golden goose, right? The golden goose is you and your creativity, and it won't keep laying eggs unless you take care of the goose, right? So at some point, if I'm not producing new work, I'm running out of things to keep the business going. Yeah. So and I kept bumping up against that problem. I'm so often helping people in the field and standing on a stage speaking and all the things that I do. But yeah, I love teaching and I love the workshops. And so I have been working on some new areas, which has been pretty time consuming, exploring. I always like to find places where I know I can take people and they can get really creative because it's not haunted by the ghosts of a million photographers, right? So I've got some fun things that I've been working on in that regard.
Cool.
That's all I'm going to say about that.
There you go. So if you want to learn more, be on Erin's good graces and maybe join her workshops. Be sure to sign up for her newsletter, right? And go to your website to find out about that.
Yes,
right?
yes. And my newsletter absolutely is the very best place.
And your workshops sell out in what?
Like an hour.
Yeah, I was just going to say a few hours.
Yeah. I mean, for a while there, that was the other thing. I just couldn't offer enough of them. I could have sold. It's very tempting, when it's like that, to just do that all the time. And that's what I basically was doing, as much as I could possibly. I used to do,
back to back at Death Valley,
Canon, and then 3 of my own back to back to back to back. And then I would fly to the Dolomites and do 3 in a row there, and then go off to the French Alps and do 2 there or whatever. And it got to the point where very often I was waking up and I wasn't sure where I was, and I wasn't doing me work. Erin wasn't getting to do her work very much, and that became a real problem. So, trying to find that point where you're still doing the stimulating workshops, which, by the way, I mean, as an educator, that is a huge source of inspiration and education for yourself. Teaching, right? I think it's extremely helpful to be in that kind of environment, even though the point there is for me to teach them. You can't help but learn. Being in what I try to produce is like a creative laboratory, and set people up with seminars, set them out there and get them to explore things. And they, run out, take some images and come back and show them on the back of the camera. And it's like, wow. And so, it's very inspiring just being around photographers like that. So I'll never not do it, but maybe not as much as I was at the peak. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's time consuming, right? What's a normal day at a workshop with you like?
Right? Especially in the summer when you're not getting any sleep because sunrise is so early and sunset is so late. And I might take one day off in the middle, and sometimes it was just an afternoon, and then I'm back in for the next round. And it was exhausting. Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Really exhausting.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Exhilarating and fun.
Yeah.
And I will say that when I would finish something like that, I had a really hard time integrating back into just doing office work, because I would miss all the people. I would miss the excitement. The buzz that you get from that is really hard to turn that off.
Right.
And it's kind of addictive.
It's so much fun, right?
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
So I'm not slamming it. It's not like it's something, that I'm trying to get away from. Far from it. I just want to make sure that the goose stays alive.
Definitely. Tony and I always joke about how we're not in workshop shape anymore because we don't go to workshops as much anymore and do too many things. So it's like we're like, oh, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I'm so tired. And it's just like, oh man, we used to wake up at 4:30 and out the door. So yeah, that's so funny but it's definitely that high and just that enjoyment experience. I think you just can't replicate,
Nope. Yeah.
So how do you keep things fresh for yourself, right? Do you try a lot of unconventional, or do you try, because you're saying like you found some new locations that you want to do. Is that part of the process for you?
Absolutely, because I'm so into exploring.
Yeah.
So if I'm not able to do enough exploring, it does sort of lose its luster after a while. So if I'm going to places where there's a level at which you repeat going to a place and you develop a relationship with it, and it's wonderful and it gets better and better and better. And then if you just do it too much, it's like anything else where you just see it for what it's been for you all that time and you're not seeing it fresh anymore. So sometimes what I have to do is go away for a while, come back, and literally the places do change sometimes. Give it a rest. But yeah, for me to really mix things up, it helps me to go someplace where I'm forced to explore. I don't know what to expect there. Yeah. It's not that I haven't been there before. It's that it really is an unknown. Yeah. That's fun. And also, like I said, I love playing around with lenses that have no business being out in a landscape. So I do that pretty frequently. Thanks to Canon, I have quite an arsenal of lenses. Yeah. And I'm constantly putting weird things in the bag just to see. And sometimes what that does is just sort of leads to a kernel of an idea that I know I can work on with the other lenses, or maybe it produces an image. But yeah, it helps keep things playful and fresh.
How satisfied do you get when you like something clicks, right? Like that aha, like is that part of like
I'm like a pit bull. I'm so like laser into the zone when I'm like that. That's the best place in the world to be. Yeah, when you have that little kernel of an idea. And I often say to people in my workshops when they're not feeling really inspired is that it starts with play. Play leads to an idea. The idea leads to an obsession. The obsession leads to an image you never knew you were going to take. And when you're in that obsession period, that is so much fun. Yeah. And sometimes this is one of the wonderful things with photography is even if you're pretty sure there's maybe not an image coming out of it, but it's just so much fun to be playing with the camera, especially when you're outdoors. And for me, I don't know, I'm just getting blasted by wind and it's just woohoo, just this incredible feeling of just being out there. And at some point, the actual image becomes secondary to just like thinking it through and just the joy of photography, just the experience of actually doing it. And I know a lot of people who come to workshops with me and they're probably never going to process their images. For them, it was that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
Just think it through and be out there and have fun. And the photography is part of it, but not that they needed, something in the bag. It's not the trophy shot. It's not that. And I love that. That's great too.
I remember I was actually going through my archive for planning for this interview. And I was like, oh, I think I processed like one photo out of the hundreds that I took because I was like, yeah, it was about, again, it was just all about having fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I do like the photos that I took, but, but again, we were helping with the workshop at the same time too. But again, it's just like, it's so much about it is just the process, right? Of being out there, engaging, with the group. And it's so much fun. But what about for yourself again? Like when you're by yourself, is it still that same high that you get?
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, when I'm out there and I get an idea, or just nature does something amazing. There is no other world beyond the immediate realm. Everything else melts away, and I'm so into it, and I love that. That's a great place to be. Recently, I was at Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument.
Where's that?
It's right on the border with Mexico in Arizona.
Okay.
And I spent a bunch of time there, and there were constant little rain squalls coming over. And then after that, the forecast kept saying bluebird, no clouds at all. And then here would just come this huge shelf of perfect cumulus clouds, and it's like, wow, every day was just so much fun with dappled light everywhere, combined with Virga coming down and just crepuscular rays and just all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And there I am with my camera, and this is not normally me. Like usually I kind of hone in on an area and I really work something, and that I love getting into that zone, and I'm just going to do that because I've zeroed in on it. And I was just the opposite. Everything was a squirrel, I'm not like that. Usually I'm just running around all over the place, and everything was a photograph that day. That's another kind of problem to have.
That's a good problem to have. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that's precious.
Yeah.
You can have that.
How do you find your locations then that you go and you photograph? Because I've never heard of that location, and not to say that. No,
okay. Usually maps.
Yeah.
What I've often say I like to go where there's a blank place on the map. Some places I don't know. It's not a known quantity. A bunch of photographers don't go there. I probably won't see any, and I don't. Those are the places I want to go. They're more. It's not necessarily inaccessible. Some of them are. But some of them are just, people don't know what's there. Photographers tend to be very, guarded with their time, and they want to go someplace where they know it's going to be fruitful. No problem with that. I understand that. We're all busy.
Yeah.
But one of the benefits, supposedly, of being a full-time professional landscape photographer is that you should be able to allow yourself the time to go out and find nothing, right? Just go, or maybe you will find something, but you won't know unless you go, right? So I'll look on maps and I'll say that could be interesting. And, I'll do a little bit of research, but usually like at Organ Pipe, I had no clue what exactly to expect. There was actually quite difficult to find imagery for that place. And so I just went around and explored, and it was truly marvelous.
Yeah.
So much fun. But some of these other places, I don't want to give too much away, but it involved very, very long flights. There's one area I'm working on there where nobody goes.
Yeah.
And it's quite fun. And I do that again, just by looking on maps and just knowing what I like to do and looking at what kind of terrain is there is enough for me to go and just try to sort it out and explore and see. Not just is it workshopable, but that's always on my mind as a professional. I have to think that through too. Like how actually realistic would it be to get human beings into this place?
Yeah, a group of them.
A group of them,
right.
and make them safe and comfortable and happy and healthy, and but also how rewarding will it be creatively? And there's some other areas too that I'm also working on in that regard that I guess I won't mention because I've probably given too much away already. But yeah, so I just really enjoy looking on a map for a place that I don't know about. That's a good start.
Yeah. Especially, too, if there's not a lot of imagery there as well, too. That's another good tip.
Yeah. And most people would say, well, there's going to be a reason for that, and usually there is. It's because it's either really hard to get there or really expensive to get there, but not always.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are places that they're super easy to get there. It's just, they're just not nobody's busted that open yet. And I do feel a bit of guilt, I think, about doing this sort of thing on the level where, I don't want to maybe these places should remain best kept secrets, so that's why I'm also a little bit cagey about it.
Sure, yeah. Well, for the places that you have been to, where has been like a few of your favorite places to go?
Well, the Dolomites, obviously, and the French Alps, and these are big areas with I have a million little places I go to in them, but they are also, and then the Southwest,
Yeah.
Because, and why I tend to like those sorts of environments, the deserts and the mountains, is because they change so much. The mountains more so because they get atmosphere that can just completely conceal and reveal entire peaks within, 5-minute period. Like the most interesting peak is here, and 5 minutes later it's over there, because it's hide and seek, right, the whole time. So I love that about mountains that get, not all mountains get that kind of atmosphere, but the ones that do, I love it. And then also deserts. Deserts are just changing. Like what's on the ground is literally changing all the time. There's the playas of mud tiles are never going to look the same from one year to the next. So I like those environments that keep me engaged in the exploration part of things because they're literally changing and need to be explored again. Every time I would do one of those Death Valley workshops, with you guys, I would get there early if I hadn't already taught a workshop in that series, and I would run around and go see how everything's looking that year.
Right. Yeah.
It's just so I had a sense because it could actually change quite a lot.
Yeah.
Features that were over here and were really good last year might be a half mile that way.
Absolutely.
The next year. So.
I know. I'm looking for. I wanted to go out this year too to go see the big lake bed. Bad water. Maybe next year I'll get to go out. But yeah,
if it does that again, you never know. Yeah.
Who knows, right? But yeah, what's the best advice then? Because we talked about like, people. This is their vacation sometimes, right? To go on a workshop with you. This is their only opportunity, right? But for those that can't go on a workshop with you, or just have to be limited in their amount of time, what's the best advice that you can give to people who just want to start that creative process?
Just for fun, you mean?
Yeah, just for fun.
Yeah. I definitely think it helps to get away from social media for one thing, in terms of it just sort of prescribing to you something that you think you should be doing, and instead really explore what it is that turns you on. So I don't think there's anything wrong with with looking at images. In fact, I encourage it. Look at images because they can be inspiring. And sometimes that's a good place to start. Working through learning how to do what someone else has done has a lot of value. But I also think that you got to remember that the fun part of it, and so there's not like the one right way to do it. And what you're seeing in those photos that inspire you, that's the right way. The best way for you to figure out what it is that you really like to do is just get out there and do a lot of it. And sometimes the best way to do that is on a workshop, because you're going to kind of supercharge all of the stuff that just takes time to learn. And once you get that down, you can focus more on the creative. But the creative comes out through doing, through habit. And so you have to get out there and do a lot of it. And one thing that I learned in college as an academic and now is that you tend to learn a lot when you are up to doing things that you wouldn't have done left to your own devices, right? So when you're kind of in a forced situation or a situation that you didn't put yourself in, you definitely have to think on your feet, right? And that can be, that's where you can just learn so much. And I think that's what college is so great for, right? It forces you into material that maybe because it seems too hard, or maybe you don't understand it. And that's what's great about workshops. So often they'll bring someone to an environment, we're going to do this. Really? And then it's their favorite thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
But you wouldn't have found that, if you hadn't have been kind of coaxed into it.
Sure. I don't know how many times we've heard that, right? What? We're going where?
Yeah. Are you sure about that?
But yes, you'll see.
Yeah.
You'll see. Yeah. So part of the collaboration process, right? We've talked a lot about that with workshops and photographing by yourself. But do you ever go out and have fun with others, right? Like, is there I know you have a team that you work with. Do you want to talk about that? Give them a shout out?
So, Photo Cascadia, we're a collective of 7 nature photographers, and we have been together now. I'm trying to think. We're on our 14th year or something like that. I don't know. But we try to keep it casual. So we do collaborate on actual projects such as workshops, and we have books out. We have 2 printed books and 1 ebook, and also another older printed book that's no longer distributed, but calendars and all sorts of things that we collaborate on. But the one thing that we have is each other, and we're friends. And we do once a year somehow usually manage to get at least 6 of the 7 together to go photograph together. And we have our next, we call them our summits. Our next one is planned in November, and we're going to go out to the Bishop area and just do some photography. But it's a chance for us to have a sit-down in-person meeting, for one thing, about what projects we're working on, what's coming up next, what we want to do. But also, just to have fun and just to get out there together. And I would say that having that collective has been one of the kind of highlights of my career and just my experiences as a landscape photographer. It's nice especially when you work for yourself and you have your own company, to feel like you're not alone in some regards. So friends are great, but friends that you actually are in some kind of structured way collaborating with, that's even better in a lot of ways, because it kind of forces us to all come together. We can't drift apart, Yes.
It's a good camaraderie, right?
It really, really is. We support each other. We have a Slack channel where we collaborate on all sorts of things together, and we can run ideas past each other. We can just sort of vent or seek advice. Just an incredible resources to have.
Yeah, and I know a few of them too. They're good people.
Really good people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got, if I may name them all.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got Zach Schnepp, David Cobb, Chip Phillips, Adrian Klein, Sean Bagshaw, and Kevin McNeil, and myself. So that's Photo Cascadia. And like I said, we're, I think, our 14th year or something like that. Yeah.
And the website too. You guys, extensive articles on photography, landscape.
Photography education going back for many years on photocascadia.com, and also a listing of current workshops that all the team members are running. We each have our own businesses, right? But that's just sort of a hub for the 7 of us to get together. It's just, it's a collective of all the businesses to kind of have yet another base. And it has been great. We have people reaching out to us all the time for different projects. When the publisher came to us for these books, that was really exciting for us because the first book, the Oregon book, was replacing the best known landscape photography book on Oregon ever. And they'd said that in this day and age, we didn't know how we could find a single photographer who would possibly cover the ground that would need to be covered now. So back then it was simpler, but now people are getting out more and there are just more places to explore and the bar is higher, right? And so when they found us, they said, here we have a team of 7 photographers. And so they reached out to us on this project to do these books, which now has turned into calendars also. We are now out with our 2025 calendars for Oregon, Washington, I think also maybe Hawaii. I've forgotten now. We had 4 of them, but it might just be Oregon and Washington for 2025 that's out right now. But yeah, you can get them kind of early.
All right.
Yeah. So that's out. Yeah.
So you have all of your images. Do you just leave them on a hard drive?
Well, certainly not. Besides sharing them and, having them make money through licensing, which is my bread and butter. But I print like crazy. Yeah. So I have Image Prograph. Yeah. I have a big one. It's 44 inches, and I have both of the extra roll holder on that. So it makes it super easy for me to change up the papers without having to actually take the thing off, and which is, just one more hurdle you have to go through when you're in the creative zone, So it's nice to just be like, no, we're doing matte now.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I will just absolutely litter my studio with prints, and it's nice to just allow yourself to do that. I think it's tempting for photographers to say, oh, this is going to cost me so much ink, or this is going to cost me so much in paper, and maybe I'll just preciously send out an image every now and then, because someone wants to buy it. I prefer, sure, I sell the prints, but I really want that to be part of my creative process, is I want to print that thing out, sometimes huge, but sometimes smaller, and put it up on the wall and see how it changes as the light changes throughout the day, and just live with it for a bit before I call it done. It's part of my processing process, right? Part of my image editing process is to live with the image on the wall for a little bit. And it really does make me see my images a little bit differently, because now not every image is intended for that kind of display. Landscape photography images get used on all sorts of things, from, jigsaw puzzles to, T-shirts to whatever, coffee mugs to TV to whatever. But that is one use that matters to me, is how does it look on the wall? So those images that I think are sort of destined for that, that's why I created them, is because I think of them in this sort of a fine art context. I need to see them on a wall before they're done.
Feels good in the hands too, right?
It feels good.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun pairing photographs with paper. Some images just really come alive on a certain kind of paper. It's not just showing off the details. It's not just, sometimes there's a character to the paper that the image shares with that paper. And when you find the right pairing, just the right, it's kind of magical.
Yeah. Right? From luster to matte, semi-gloss, and all those.
A little bit of metallic all in there.
Different, so many different papers. But just like those minute details in the textures can definitely come alive.
Yeah, so I could never be one of those photographers that just does everything on acrylic, because I want that look. But that was very in vogue, at least a few years ago. I think people are back to discovering papers again and realizing what's given up when all you do is just the same surface all the time. So I really encourage anyone who has even enough space for a smaller 17-inch printer or something just to do it. Just get in there and see what your images look like when you can actually hold them.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you feel like hey, I saw that detail. Like I added that detail in Photoshop, or right, you like did something. But then when you print it out, you're like, oh, I didn't even notice that. But it's just like, it's so funny. Like to me, again, when I'm processing and I print something, sometimes I just like overlook some details and then I forget about them. And then when it's actually printed, I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually a really cool detail there.
I think for me, it's largely just how the tones and the colors are working, because, working and the difference between additive and subtractive light is huge, between seeing it on a monitor and seeing it on paper. The way that the tones and the colors come off is very different. It really is. And so you really don't know until you actually see it on paper, how well those are all working together. And in some images, they just need to be slightly differently processed for different purposes.
Mm-hmm. I know you're working on a few things that you're open to talking about.
I already let a little slip.
But can you tell us a few of the things that you got coming up?
Well, one that may or may not be out by the time that this episode airs that I just finished up is an ebook with Canon, which I think I can talk about.
It's coming out in the fall, so yeah.
Okay, all right.
Or I don't know about the ebook.
I don't know when the ebook's coming out.
I don't
think
know either.
sooner than that, but I'm actually not sure.
We'll go with it.
And then maybe I should check my contract, make sure I'm allowed to talk about this, but I think it's okay. It's all good. But yeah, I just wrote an ebook in collaboration with Canon's social team that will be available soon on mastering light in landscape photography. Cool. And so that is, it's a pretty substantial book with a lot that's written and a lot of images in there that I hope people will find helpful for working with light in a variety of situations. And again, not in a prescriptive way that side light is your friend, just go do that, golden hour, it's definitely not just that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's more. There's more.
It's all of it.
Yeah. And then a few other things.
I've got another article coming out on style and landscape photography in a magazine that's new. Again, this is not. It's the former team of a now defunct, very well known magazine that shall remain nameless. But anyway, they've started up a new venture, and I've got that article coming out soon. Cool. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Well, very true. Yeah. So as we wrap things up, where can people follow you, connect with you, get in touch with you?
My website, first and foremost, erinbabnik.com. And on that, I have a newsletter where you can subscribe to, and I strongly encourage people just to get on that. If you want to be on my workshops, when I start listing the new ones, which will be not until next year when I'm getting my next crop ready. But when I do, just know that they do tend to sell out very quickly. And so it helps to get on. Those are separate lists. You can get on the workshop waiting lists, and then you will be on this short list of people know ahead of time that that's happening. But otherwise, photocascadia.com with my team and all the usual channels, Instagram and whatnot. I'm there as well.
All right. Well, Erin, it was a pleasure as always to sit down and talk with you, and great to see you in person. So thanks for coming in.
Always. And thanks for the great questions.
Thank you, Erin.
Great conversation. Is that enough? Okay. Woo, we did it.
Rock and roll.